Okay. Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon. My name is Elmore Alexander, and I'm a senior advisor with Optimal Campus. And you're joining us today for the fourth in our series of analyses of data and how data can make universities better. We began looking at analyzing your program portfolio from a data analysis perspective, then looked at new programs. Last week, we got down nitty-gritty looking at efficiency kinds of analysis. And today we move on to talk about how to leverage technology to differentiate your institution. Nuno Couto, the founder of Optimal Campus, is our presenter today. Optimal Campus has been around about 15 years, working in the higher ed and broader space in IT infrastructure. Nuno's headed up projects with the likes of Boston College, Boston University, and Harvard. And he really is an expert in ERP systems and how they are utilized within universities. More importantly, he really has a passion for higher ed and how to make higher ed better from the perspective of giving back in terms of in the context of what he feels like he got. So Nuno, welcome today. And I'm going to turn the floor over to you to take a look at technology and differentiating a higher education institution.
Thank you, Elmore, and thank you everyone for joining. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about something that I'm quite excited about. As Elmore mentioned, he gave you some of my background. I would like to add briefly that in addition to the management of many projects within higher ed, I also have a love of entrepreneurship, and to that end, am an advisor to Startup Weekend, which is actually a Google organization, as well as Building Global Innovators, which is one of Portugal's most successful startup incubators. So as we talk, it'll become obvious that I'm bringing together the perspective of a project manager, a consultant, a higher ed practitioner, as well as an entrepreneur, given that I founded the company, but that I also mentor startup companies, sometimes student startup companies, sometimes alumni startup companies, and sometimes other types of companies. So just to give you a little bit of background, again, on Optimal and some of the organizations we've worked with. Of course, I'm not going to go into detail, but these are some of the organizations either I or our consultants have worked with in the past or are presently working with. So as you can tell, great passion for higher ed, focus on higher ed, a desire to give back, based on a personal story from my youth and how difficult it was for me to actually get into higher ed, not because I didn't want to, but because of other pressures. But that taught me, that developed in me a great desire to give back and make a difference. So let me try to make a difference today and help you to think through some concepts that hopefully will help you to use technology to differentiate your institution. So just a brief agenda. We'll talk a little bit about where we are today and some of the challenges that higher ed institutions are going through. Then talk about what I perceive as part of the solution, which is, as you can guess, innovation. Talk about some of what those trends are for innovation in higher ed, and then bring it all together at the end. So as everyone knows, universities are in a difficult situation currently. I mean, the Harvards of the world, the MITs of the world, the large, well-known or highly differentiated universities are doing okay. They're going to be doing it okay. But the less known, less differentiated universities are, many of them, in trouble. So we have to be very aware that not only is that happening, we're on the other side of a pandemic, and certainly it's helpful not to be in the pandemic, but schools are still recovering and in need of answers to pressing questions as to what do I do now? the playing field has changed. A lot of the universities today have, still lots and lots of legacy technologies, lots of consolidating to do, lots of outdated content, lots of outdated applications, hardware, etc. And then on the other side, you've got students that are putting pressure to, acquire more skills than degrees in many cases, which is causing universities to change to a large extent their, at least consider changing their approach to how they educate. And you can see down at the diagram where, in general, universities are across their digital maturity. You see, really, at the very right-hand side, only 2% that have honestly leveraged and harvested their investments in digital transformation. And you see only 13 that have delivered and are actually scaling it. So lots of work to be done. Obviously, universities want to be more competitive. Obviously, universities want to have a better student experience. They want to optimize resources, and they want to do that to a large extent by using data, by using data-driven decision-making. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. But this is no secret. This is where the universities are. This is where they want to be. So, in my opinion, and in the opinion of others that work with Optimal, it's incredibly important to differentiate and innovate. Now, that may sound like an entrepreneur's perspective. It is an entrepreneur's perspective, but it is also the reality of where we are. Unless an organization is differentiated because of the pressure, some of which we've spoken about already, if there is no differentiation, why is it that a student would decide to go to your school? So innovation, differentiation, thinking differently is important. And we believe that that type of innovation is at the intersection of a really strong understanding of the higher ed trends, the understanding of general technology trends, and then brought together with that entrepreneurial mindset. So where does one begin? How do you innovate? I think the important thing to do first is to step back and truly understand, what is my institution's mission? What is its value proposition? What is its vision? Every university obviously wants to go somewhere, be somewhere. Where does it want to be? Without an understanding of where that university wants to be, it is very difficult to help it to get there. Now, it's also possible that where it wants to be could be modified, and hopefully the folks listening would have a potential impact into those sorts of discussions. But whether you're helping the organization to get to where it wants to be, or you want to help it to think about other options, it is important to start with the mission, vision, and value proposition. Now, here are some things that you want to ask yourself. And when I say yourself, I'm talking about higher ed IT leaders, CIOs, directors, but of course, this also involves your teams. So keep that in mind. So what is the perception of university leadership as regards your IT organization? Are you just a service provider or an order taker, or are you at the table with upper management leadership as a strategic partner? What does the president think of technology? What do the trustees think of technology? And the reason I ask this question is because if there isn't enough respect for the technology impact, the potential impact of technology to the competitive advantage of the university, well, you're already at a disadvantage. Now, that's changed significantly over the last couple of years. A lot of schools that didn't have that sort of respect for technology have quickly come to realize that IT, without IT, there would be no school because everyone had to go remote. Now, there are still places where their level of respect is not where it needs to be. If you are in one of those places, well, it's unfortunate because you may not be able to make as much of a difference as you would otherwise. But it's up to you. It'll be a little bit more challenging, but I think some of these concepts can still apply. The very first thing to do is really to begin to think like an entrepreneur, to begin to be very creative, to begin to truly be open to new possibilities, possibilities that maybe are not even being discussed. But all of that has to be driven by a true understanding of who your customer is and what they need. You can't bring a product to a market that doesn't exist, which is the mistake that many entrepreneurs make. You have to solve a problem for your market, in which case they are the leaders of the rest of the institution, the staff, the faculty, the students. So it's really important to listen to them, to talk to them, but to talk to them in a very, very engaged way and to listen very carefully. And again, the goal is to look for things that the university can do in a way that will differentiate the university, that leverages what the university already is good at. The sorts of characteristics, the sorts of behaviors that a leader needs to have in order to move this forward is to, as I mentioned, ask those difficult questions, question everything, ask why we're doing what we're doing, ask what would happen if we did it differently, but not just ask those questions, listen to the answers and have these deep, highly engaged conversations with people, ideally people that are different from yourselves. And sure, you're the CIO, so you'll be talking to the students, faculty, staff, etc. But even within your own team, talk to your own team, gather information from them, listen to what might consider crazy ideas. Maybe the idea is a little crazy, but out of the crazy idea might come something that is useful. Always, always be very, very observant of what's happening around you. Be very curious. And then try different things, experiment. It's not just a matter of thinking differently, it's a matter of behaving differently. Now, what are some of the characteristics of an environment that is conducive to generating these new ideas? So first of all, the leader needs to be able to set the example, right? So the leader needs to be an innovative thinker. The leader needs to be willing to take risks. The leader shouldn't punish anyone when they fail, if they're really trying to move the organization ahead. The leader should provide, the organization should provide time and recognition for innovative ideas and encourage innovative ideas and have a process for generating those ideas and submitting those ideas. One CIO that I know well actually had a monthly meeting scheduled with the staff. It wasn't mandatory, but there would be a topic around which innovation was needed. And he would facilitate, or someone else in the team would facilitate, a discussion around potentially innovative ideas in order to solve problem X, Y, and Z. And it was a very, very successful and very well attended monthly meeting. Also, you can't really innovate as much as you could without being exposed to these new ideas. So absolutely having training opportunities available to staff, bringing in innovative thinkers from the outside for for discussions, for webinars, for in-person conversations, people who will challenge the status quo, who have experience in being very innovative themselves. And they don't have to be from higher ed. They can be from other industries. It's important also to provide some level of guidance. So you can't just say to people, I want new ideas. Well, I want new ideas about what? Who do I work with? What's the process for submitting them? What if I think the idea is too crazy? And there has to be some sort of a framework around how people are innovative. And every organization is different, but providing some framework will help people to buy in, be less afraid, because they know it's officially sanctioned, and submit more ideas. And the collaboration is extremely, and trust is extremely important. People are not going to submit ideas unless they trust that they're being respected. They trust that no one's going to laugh at them. They trust that people are going to evaluate it seriously, provide constructive criticism. So there's a cultural aspect to this. And I think it's also very important for the leader to display the qualities of servant leadership, which means that they want to help the team to succeed. They really want to help the people who are around them to generate these ideas and to develop these ideas and to execute on these ideas. And he's not there to say, no, this is a bad idea, but he's there to enable the discussion and make people feel worthy of their ideas, and to be a champion for the process. Now, those are some of the correct characteristics of leaders and in environments and innovative environments. But it's also important to marry those with an understanding of really what's going on around you. So certainly doing that through conversations, but they're, of course, also doing research and being aware of what's going on. Now, we're not going to go into detail on this, but EDUCAUSE is a great resource for higher ed IT, as everyone knows. So being aware of what the major issues are. So obviously there are big talent issues these days. Universities are losing staff left and right. Most of our clients are having this issue as we speak. We don't see it changing very much in the near future, even if the economy is slowing down a bit. But so engaging people in this process may help to drive up their morale. But in addition, if you look at the middle section at the very bottom, data insight, data action is very, very important. So it's obviously very important as you have these discussions to do some measurement of the impact that these ideas can have on the organization. Everybody wants to work a hybrid work schedule. Obviously, the students want to do hybrid classes as well. That's having an impact. Everybody wants to do anything that they want from anywhere. So just some of these issues that you need to be aware of as you're thinking creatively and innovatively. Some of the other trends that are going on right now, everybody's worried about affording a college degree. Is it worth it? Am I going to get the job that I want when I graduate? Am I going to have the real world experience? Do I need to go to college? Do I need to enroll? What other options do I have? And of course, we know about the demographic changes in students that are forecasted. Endowments are also dropping from years ago. As mentioned before, the colleges are merging or closing. And on the other hand, there's a greater awareness of technology and the power of technology. So knowing the bigger picture understanding what is in the mind of all of your stakeholders, what keeps them up at night, including these very, very, very big trends, is incredibly important as an input into that creative, innovative process. Here are some other innovative learning trends. I'm sure you've heard about micro-credentials. Blockchain is making that more and more of a possibility, where even a person reading a book could eventually become a credential. But people are looking, students are looking for just-in-time learning, just-in-time education. Kids today and adults are used to going to YouTube if they need to learn something that minute. They don't necessarily want to sit for an entire semester class on a particular topic if they can just reach out and read an article, watch a video, take even a short online course on that particular topic. Maker spaces are also becoming bigger and bigger. Rather than giving someone an assignment to read something from a textbook, professors are many times asking students to go into the makerspace and design a solution and to build a solution, and then to show it to the class, and maybe it becomes used elsewhere as well. So again, I'm not going to go through all these different trends, but being aware of what's going on in terms of these learning trends is extremely important. Now, in terms of technology learning trends, so the technology around learning trends, obviously virtual reality is a big deal these days. One person that we've actually had at our meetup events is a very well-known, renowned creator of virtual reality environments. And he was able to generate an environment where it would simulate a person being in the streets of France at a cafe and listening to those around him or her, engaging with the culture, engaging with the people around them. And of course, there's nothing that can substitute that sort of experience. Artificial intelligence is getting to a point where people are talking about having artificial intelligence teach classes. Artificial intelligence already grades assignments. Artificial intelligence looks for duplications of one's work somewhere on the internet in order to avoid cheating. Internet of Things, for example, is able to now tell whether a student has been in their room for days, for example, which would indicate a concern for their mental health. So, but you can also see how some of these things bring up questions of ethics, but that's a bigger discussion. But in any case, knowing about these technology trends is really important. Being aware of some of the innovative IT operations paradigms, such as everything is going to the cloud, just-in-time infrastructure, physical assets, IT assets are disappearing more and more. One item I wanted to bring attention to is the very last one, the business-minded new hires. More and more, the technical folks are being expected to understand the business needs of the organization, or at least to be interested in those sorts of things. So this is a great, having those sorts of people is a great input into this innovative process, because hopefully they're thinking about how to innovate, how to make things better, not just how to code. Other ways that innovation is happening from a project management standpoint, for example, is these tools, some of them, again, based on artificial intelligence. Some tools actually predict project success based on entering some information about the project. And before the project begins, you're able to tell whether that project has a good chance of succeeding or not. There are also tools that can recommend the right level of methodology that based on the team dynamics, the culture, the organization, the project, the team, that it can say, this is the recommended project methodology, and even sometimes generate some of the artifacts or the templates that would be used during the project. Some technology now also allows for automatic adjustment of the project plans with a very limited amount of input. So rather than a project manager having to go through the entire project plan and make changes, artificial intelligence is helping to reduce that level of effort. There's artificial intelligence that now also is able to automate some of the more repetitive tasks that a project manager does. For example, taking notes, scheduling meetings, rearranging schedules, extracting action items from notes. That's where the technology is going. So a lot more that could be discussed, but these are some examples of the sorts of innovations that can happen in project management. Examples of some of the tools that you may or have not heard about for project management, for example, Notion. Notion is a relatively new entrant to the market, and that allows not just for the tracking of tasks and projects, but also does a better job than most tools I've seen in terms of the tracking and reporting on the interrelationships between different projects. It also has an AI component that is even newer, and that promises to help one to generate original draft content, and from there that can be edited by a human being. Otter is able, for example, to not just transcribe a meeting, but also to extract the most important points from that meeting, whether they be decisions or action items. Rambox is an interesting recent entrant to the market as well, different from the other two tools, but basically it creates an environment for each project or each area of work, and very easily one can go from one area to another on their computer without having to open multiple pieces of software or documents. You just one click, you're in project X and that environment for project X. One click, you're in a different environment for a different project. Motion uses AI technology to help individuals and project teams to plan and schedule work. So where normally calendars are mostly static, Motion is smart enough, based on some criteria entered, to know if such and such moves on the schedule, here's what everything else needs to move. And it looks at everyone's schedules in order to determine the best possible alternative times to meet. Sensama is an interesting tool that actually leads a person through their planning process and helps them to time block the activities and helps them to plan what happens next. But in terms of internal tools, we also have developed some tools, or are in the process of developing more tools. But as an example, this is a tool that we created a few years ago for a data warehousing project. And based on a number of development assumptions, project assumptions, inputs, resource assumptions, and allocations, we're able to generate a schedule for the project based on the best information that's available. In terms of innovative IT project processes, I would say, since we're running out of time, that the most important one on this list really is the phase zero planning. And this isn't new to anyone. None of the items in this list are new to anyone, but I'd like to specifically mention phase zero planning. Too many projects are started with a business case, and then it's a go. Everyone starts to work. Sure, there may be a planning phase allocated to the project, but the planning phase doesn't get that much attention, and it happens throughout the project. Phase zero means you step back and you think through very carefully the entire project, the project structure, the project schedule, the project methodology, the project resources, the project timing, before the project actually begins. And it's something that we highly, highly, highly recommend doing. It's something that pays dividends over and over again, and allows a project team to have the answer to the questions that a vendor typically asks during the project, for example, for an ERP project, and which in many cases, the answer is we don't know. And the answer, because of not having the answer, the project is delayed, expenses go up, scope is not met.
No, can I come in for a second?
Of course.
Here, and I want to go to Richard Hackathorn, who's had some comments in chat in just a second, but something that he said early on, I think really fits in at this point, and maybe we can talk about this for just a second and then pivot to him. But one of his early comments was, oh, you're right on. Academic institutions need to think like businesses. You and I have been part of academic institutions for a long time, and we know that they have a hard time thinking like businesses. Any thoughts off the top of your head as to how they can pivot into that business thinking mode and not be lynched by a faculty mob?
That's a good question. It reminds me of one experience I had quite a few years ago, where when I was being introduced at the university, and when I was quite new to higher ed, this was 15 to 20 years ago, I was told never to use the word business in meetings. So that was quite an awakening at the time. So to try to answer your question, it's a difficult question to answer, but I would say, number one, don't use the word business. Number two, attempt to put these principles and many others in place by using the language of your audience. There are different ways to say the same thing without speaking, as an entrepreneur. You can be entrepreneurially minded, you can be creative, but you can use other language.
Just don't say it.
Say it, but don't say it.
Yeah, let's bounce to Richard. He's had some comments in chat, and I think it'd be good to reach out there. Richard, do you want to make a comment or suggest a question?
Yeah, I have spent the last 20 plus years high tech, large corporations, seeing IT departments of both on the cutting edge and lagging edges of the industry. And boy, it seems like higher education is just like some of the more slow to adopt, low innovation types of industries. Some areas of manufacturing, for instance, we have never done that before, and a computer cannot make those decisions. A person must make those decisions. So it seems like higher education's coming to the point of complexity where they can't sweep it under the rug any longer, and not paying the bills is only one artifact or one effect of not thinking that you are running a business. And for the culture to forbid even the term business seems to me to be downright unhealthy. I could put it a little stronger, but I'll stick with unhealthy.
Something that I've observed from IT managers that it's a good friend of Nuno's and mine has done this. And a couple of things that he did, I think, that really had an impact were, one, he came and solved some budget problems. As opposed to being the guy who needed more money. He all of a sudden figured out ways to solve problems and put money back into the system. That had a huge impact. The other thing that he did, and I think that this is something that IT is really at the forefront on, is in many respects, the IT departments are where project management skills exist within universities. And that's something that can be outsourced from IT departments to the remainder of the university, and it changes the perception of the effectiveness of the IT. And this particular CIO did that. He became the point from which project management happened, and he ended up hiring staff to just do project management and getting some of his folks project management certified, and it changed the power structure, I think, and gave him much, much more influence. If I can keep interrupting, Nuno, Michael Ginsberg had a comment, and if we can go, I think he's going to disagree and suggest a pivot point as well. Michael?
Thanks, Elmore. I said I disagree, and I was disagreeing with Nuno's suggestion that don't say business. Richard just said it very well, and I think that's the problem that many educational institutions have. Is they, as one of my the faculty in one of my departments said to me one day when I said we need to look at our business model, there was a great intake of breath, and they said, "This is not a business. This is a calling." And I said, "Yeah, but if we don't get the business model right, nobody's going to call anymore." And I think that is a real problem. Those institutions where they can't understand that they are running a business are the ones that are running into trouble.
Yep.
I think the problem is that I think most people think of a business as something that is putting widgets out the shipping dock at the lowest price and as many as they can ship. And if we use the models from like the healthcare industry, this discussion is kind of like discussing innovation in a hospital without starting with the patients that are coming through the door. I think if you define business as being really to make an effective learning experience for your patients, and not repair them from some broken leg, but enable them to really learn and prosper in the future society. It turns a lot of this discussion, I think, around from an institutional perspective to really a very personal one.
Yeah.
Now that's a business that I can get behind.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, doctors and professors fit into the same ballpark. I think there, as a number of you know, my son and daughter-in-law are both college professors at small schools, and I spent a lot of time during the pandemic trying to get them to understand what the college business model was and why their universities, why their colleges were doing things going on in that regard. Let's bounce back for you though, and let you move things a little bit forward, and we'll come back to folks from a discussion standpoint.
Thank you, Elmore. I do want to say that Michael's approach to confronting the issue and not being afraid to say the word business, I think is actually also a good approach. Ideally, and that's because there is no answer to no one size fits all. I work with universities that are incredibly innovative at the very top of the organization, at the president's level, but also at the CIO level, just incredibly open to new ideas and very aware that they're running a business. And businesses need to change and adapt and improve and change. I also see the exact opposite. So I think I think that the approach to innovation and to even talking about innovation is probably a little bit different depending on the institution you're at. But it certainly helps to have someone at the very top that is open to the idea and can say the word business and set that example. But just moving on to, we're getting close to the end. I know that I have to be watchful of time. So if we're going to connect the dots, the most important takeaway from this is that you gotta know what's going on around you. You gotta be talking to people. You gotta be open to new ideas. You gotta put in place an environment that is conducive to thinking differently, that doesn't punish failure. You have to be setting the example. Yes, you have to be thinking like an entrepreneur. Even if you can't say the word entrepreneur, but which again, in some institutions, they're ready for it and they should be talking about this in business terms. And it is that approach and that awareness and that setting the example that is going to move innovation forward. But in practical terms, what would be the steps? And I think this is where design thinking 101 can really be helpful. Again, number one, empathize. Be talking to people. Truly care about their opinion. Truly try to understand what they're talking, what their concerns and what their pain points are. Bring together all that information. Look for trends and patterns in what people are telling you. Come up with some ideas. Go back to those people and say, what do you think? And then prototype, right? And then test. And then, implement and iterate. So most people know about design thinking, but I think it applies in this approach. I think I'm going to skip some of these slides because we are running out of time.
Let me come in and interject a little question here that I think is something that I think is on many people's mind, and that is that it's an expensive process. What kind of strategies are colleges using to make this, especially smaller institutions, to make this accessible, to get past the kind of cost challenges that are there?
I think the number one thing is to have such a strong business case, such a high return on investment. I mean, the ideal is, very high return on investment, low risk, relatively easy to implement. The closer one comes to having that sort of business case, the more obvious it becomes that you gotta move forward with it. But of course, you also have to have champions that internally that are going to drive it forward, especially if it's a relatively expensive undertaking. Again, I'm not saying anything that's new. It just comes back to the basics. Prove that I am going to be much better off after implementing this endeavor. Does that answer your question, Elmore?
Yes, that's good follow-up there.
And again, it comes down to be able to support it, be able to provide the data, be able to show what others have been able to do, and be able to show the savings, the increase in revenues. The more evidence you have for moving forward with something, the better. Now, sometimes the idea is so innovative that no one else has tried it. So hopefully you're in an environment where that level of creativity is allowed. I think the takeaway from this slide is basically people. Success depends on the human component and the involvement of the right people and the concern for their well-being and an improvement in their lives and their experiences. That is going to be what differentiates the more successful ideas and implementation of those ideas than the technology itself. So never let technology, never automate a bad process, as they say, right? Never adopt a technology because it's cool or because everyone else is doing it. Do it because it's in line with the organizational vision. It really addresses a clear pain point. It is clear by using data that it will benefit the organization. Don't do it just because of the technology. Arizona State University was one of the greatest examples of this sort of approach. They basically years ago said, we're going to have a predominantly physical infrastructure free footprint. And this was years ago, before it was actually in vogue as much as it is today. They've been able to be recognized by U.S. News and World Report as the most innovative university in the country, beyond even MIT and Stanford. So just a great example. It's interesting to look them up and see how they did it, for those of you who were able to take the time to do so. We are coming to an end. I do want to mention that Optimal is doing a bunch of work in Workday. Workday is a big, as you know, ERP system that a lot of universities are putting in place. But getting back to that phase 0 planning, if you're thinking of Workday, please do yourself a favor, whether it's with Optimal or someone else, ensure that they are ready to start. Think through with someone who's done it many times before, what it's going to take to do it, what the ups and downs will be along the way, what the vendors are going to try to convince you of doing that maybe you shouldn't do. Just think through things at the beginning before phase 1 actually happens. Specifically, our phase 0 planning does a number of things, what you see on the screen. So making sure you have the right roles and responsibilities and the right resources. A lot of times, who the vendor provides may or may not be the right people. And I have seen the vendor provide 2 or 3 people for a job that can be done by one. Or in some cases can be done by a part-time expert. These are the sorts of things that would be brought up. Also, business process analysis. How many times have you been in a vendor implementation where the vendor wants to know how to configure the system and they ask, what do you do now? What's your process like now? What do you want your process to be like later so that we can configure the system accordingly? Well, the answer sometimes by the client is silence because they don't fully understand the current processes, never mind having thought about the future process. And that, not having those answers when the vendor asks, will cause major delays. So having those things documented up front will significantly reduce risk and delays and, of course, additional costs during the project. Testing, preparing for what needs to be tested. mapping those requirements into actual testing scenarios so that as early on as you possibly can, you know what you're going to be needing to look at closely during your testing phase, which helps you, of course, to plan and schedule and know what resources are going to be needed through that phase and other phases. Also, highly encourage having someone independent from the vendor who has done this before, and ideally who has worked. We try to actually have people who actually have worked for that vendor come in independently, knowing how the vendor works, knowing what the project methodology is of that vendor, independently review what's going on and give you some advice on how to, cut some costs, cut some time, make some decisions that are not being necessarily considered as an option by the vendor. And then, of course, we try to give you, if desired, recommendations and even tools for running your project, whether it's PM related templates or BA or testing, security, whatever it may be, and potentially also some of our internal tools for planning. So if you're interested, don't hesitate to contact myself. There's my email or Elmore. We really and sincerely hope that this is helpful to you. We're here to help. This is not just a job for any of us. This is really a mission and a passion to make a difference to higher ed.
Nuno, let me get you in closing to go back to where you started, and that was the idea of digital maturity. And you gave us an example a moment ago of Arizona State, and I assume you would identify them as being an institution that is very digitally mature. But can you point to one or two programs, projects, strategies that are out there that you think are really exemplary of digital maturity and something that schools ought to be thinking about? How can I get to a point where I'm doing X? Because that would suggest that I have become digitally mature.
I will point you towards the university that I believe is probably one of the most innovative from an IT perspective that I have worked with, at least in a very long time. And it's my alma mater, so I might be a little bit partial, but I've worked with them for years, and I have seen some really, really interesting approaches to things, innovative outlooks, and that is Northeastern University. Very impressed with the work that they do, very impressed with their technological prowess, their ability to, during COVID, and even now, the tools that they have in place for collaboration across the world, and the money they've been able to save by allowing people to work remotely. Just very, very impressive. If anyone needs an introduction to the folks over there, I'm happy to do that.
Well, I think certainly President Owen has been very, very impressive, as has Michael Crow at Arizona State. And I can't think of the name of Owen's book right off the top of my head, but it's a very, very good read in terms of the thinking that you've been talking about, and I recommended that. I think we're sort of at the end of our hour, so let me thank you, Nuno, for your presentation, your insight, and from the folks that have reached out to us through the chat and into their questioning. We appreciate your involvement today. As Nuno said, if you've got questions, reach out to us. I would also say that if you found this interesting, take a look back at our earlier and weren't part of any of our earlier webinars, whether it was looking at efficiency or looking at how to evaluate new programs or how to look at your program portfolio. The webinars are all up on our website, and I think something that you can learn about there, and we'd encourage you to check those out. The underlying thought is data. data is the key to moving forward, and it's the institutions that have the data that are going to understand what they need to do and are going to be able to do what they did. I once brought Barney Frank in after he retired from the House to talk to students at Bridgewater State. And Barney Frank, the liberal activist that he was, when one of the students asked him, what should we be taking more of? What kind of courses should we be taking? And he said, stuff with numbers. He says, the folks that understand the numbers are going to rule the world. And if that comes from an individual like Barney Frank, I think that's pretty sound indication of the breadth and importance. So thanks again for those of you who have participated with us. We hope to see you again when we do something like this in the future. It's been nice having you participate. Good day.
Take care.